Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Welcome to USAPrepares.com, everybody. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. And my website, in case you haven't been there, is offgridmontana.com, Montana spelled out. And it's going to have a little more relevance today because a lot of the pictures in the gallery about gardening and such is what we're going to be talking about. And I want to thank Jason from Minnesota for engineering the broadcast. And our guest is Dr. Rick Miller, who's typically our Thursday guest. And welcome to the broadcast, Rick.
Thank you. Be a pleasure. I'm very sorry about what's happening globally and especially to Vincent and GNC. I think the whole thing is a bunch of hooey, and I don't quite get why Skype is down today, why this is happening yesterday, why the day before. It's almost as if something's being orchestrated, and I don't get it.
Well, I can explain it to you in just one title of one article. Right here, this article came out today, Coming to America, the complete deplatforming of all non-establishment voices. This is code for if we can't pay you off, if we can't buy you to basically deliver the messages, propaganda, lies, false flags, and hoaxes that we want, we are going to cut you off. That's exactly what this is all about. And, Rick, since you went there, before we started, we're going to have a good show today, folks. Rick gave me 4 talking points last night when I spoke to him personally. We're going to talk about pole shifts and what's happening to our atmosphere changes and how to survive it. We're going to talk about the immune system, and we're going to talk about medical tyranny and vaccines and things of that nature. We're also going to talk about gardening and edible and medicinal plants, and some of these topics are things that I haven't talked about in a couple of years. When I first came on the air, I was talking about gardening and edible and medicinal plants across the nation on many different shows on a regular basis. And because my book is about the basically using financial, economic, social, and political rationale to help the little people, the bottom 93% of income earners, and to disclose the distractions, the dumbing down, and the dividing of groups in America, we kind of went in, we deviated, if you will, into other topics. And it's going to be fun to get back into edible medicinal plants, gardening, and talking about the immune system, which is really all connected. But Rick, since you mentioned that, let me give a few articles here. I'm just going to give titles, as self-explanatory, and shows what confirms what I just said in answer to your comment. UC San Diego professor compares unborn children to cancer. Next article, Planned Parenthood and Black Lives Matter are partnering up for Women's New Deal movement. Well, we all know that Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger are responsible for more loss of lives in the black community than ever. It's just, the irony is unbelievable. If you read this article, folks, I'm not going to go into the comment section now, but if you read the comment section, it's unbelievable. Words like double standards, hypocrisy, not practicing what you preach. I know the elite hate those terms, so I'm going to use them quadruply more than I ever have, and I'm going to cite examples to that. Next article is Ukraine tapped by Obama administration to hurt Trump and help Clinton and protect the Bidens. I'm not making this up. This is why the first article I just mentioned, I'm going to reread it, Coming to America, the complete deplatforming of all non-establishment voices. Because they don't want truth. They don't want freedom. They don't want liberty. They don't want the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They basically have an addiction to power, money, and control, and they want to tell the people, the little people especially, the bottom 93% of income earners, what to say, what to think, how to act, who to do it with, and when to do it. Next article. Hillary may finally have lost her mind. It's beyond holy crap. And again, if this show wasn't on AM and FM as well as podcast, I wouldn't be saying holy crap. But Hillary Clinton calls on China to illegally obtain Trump's tax records and give them to the U.S. media. Even though when Trump said it, he was joking, but she has deleted 33 emails with bleach bit and hammers and who knows what else, bonfires, who knows. But there's over 30,000 emails deleted from Hillary Clinton that has not gone to the public. At the same time, Barack Obama didn't even, he basically classified his whole past. And they're asking for Trump's tax returns. It's unbelievable. And what's the exclamation point on the double standards and irony is that DNC Chair Tom Perez has been repeatedly calling on Republicans in recent days to not use stolen information. And here Hillary is asking for foreign government to steal information for the Democrats. And what Tom Perez is probably talking about would be Julian Assange, who is basically a liaison for truth. And speaking of Julian Assange, the next article, Julian Assange and the Clinton Foundation, this is from Julian Assange, pardon me. The Clinton Foundation and ISIS were funded from the same source. This is an article. Another article, 35 people show up to the beta campaign event. Do you think the people are waking up to the fact that it's less left-right paradigm and more aristocracy managing the serfs? Here's another article. It's titled, Say What, Cuomo? You can't make this stuff up. Chris Cuomo says Antifa is a good cause. He got fried on his own segment, his own network, by the guests for saying that. You know, folks, this is why we do what we do. We try to give information to the people so they can control their own destiny. Because when you have eliminated hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications, and lower the bars of standards of expectation based on what group you're in, you never help that group. You destroy your country by doing that. Mediocrity nobody benefits from mediocrity except for the elite who's already in place. So, Rick, after my little rant, I want to thank you for that question. That was not planned, by the way, folks.
I loved it. Well, there you go.
What do you want to talk about first? The pole shifts, how to survive it, or the immune system? And
well, I sent you this morning. Things changed, like with Vincent. When I did radio with him, we have a bunch of things we're going to talk about, and then we never get there. And that's because the spontaneity of the moment changes everything. And,
absolutely.
Well, then there we are. This morning I sent you an incredibly interesting link of an advertisement about Assange that was made by the U.S. and Australian government. And just watch that one. That's I sent you a link just a little bit before we went on the air.
Okay, can you paraphrase and summarize what the message would be in that for the listeners?
I'll just let you know. It's a nice little. I couldn't possibly outstage that one. Just trust me on that. Just watch it, and you tell me what happened. You can post it on the site for others later. I find it interesting that your Skype isn't working this morning. I find it interesting. How come?
Well, it's not my
Microsoft.
Skype.
You know, once Microsoft took over Skype, I never had problems with Linux. I never had problems with Skype. I never had problems. There were certain kinds of software I've never had problems until Microsoft took over. And that's that. I'm wondering why that is. Now, we have only basically two platforms. We have, Apple, and we have Microsoft. But I remember a day when it was DOS. And every week, there's updates, patches, and why? Why doesn't Linux need a patch? I have big questions about that. What do I want to talk about today? I'm not the leader. What I am is Spock. I'll be second and support the technical aspects. That does not mean I have the answers. And I don't. And candidly, I'm as good as you get in that arena, and yet I have no idea what any of this means. You talked about a pole shift. Okay. This morning, Pluto is losing its atmosphere. Now, this is a moment for us to be able to watch a what-if scenario with Earth. And we're watching that from space and seeing what's happening on another planet in our solar system that is, but for the grace of God. Oh, wait. We are also having a pole shift like Pluto. Now, what's happening with Pluto right now? Well, they're losing their atmosphere. Remember when Matt Stein said, quote, 3 minutes for air, 3 days for water, and 3 weeks for food. What's most important? Now, everybody immediately would say water. And I would say basically yes, except that 3 minutes for air sounds pretty scary. Now, we're talking about a what-if scenario. We're not talking about it's going to happen. Oh, wait. It has happened in the past, and there is evidence that this has happened before because of ice plugs in the Arctic. You can say what happened because it's like a record or a disk that has trapped information.
Rick, hold on to that thought, and you can finish your pole shift monologue after we get back after the break. Thanks for holding, folks. Welcome back to USAPrepares.com. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. And our guest, our regular Thursday guest, is Dr. Rick Miller. And Rick, before the break, you were talking about polar shifts, possibly atmosphere changes, losing atmosphere on Pluto. Now, the reason why you're discussing this, I assume, is because you want to talk about the probability of that happening here, survival rates, timelines, things of that nature. You know, one of the things that when we spoke last Thursday, you and I together, you know, I talked about a lot of the so-called scares, you know, from the Earth overheating as per Stephen Hawking's ice ages, the San Andreas Fault in California falling in the ocean, or the New Madras Fault where the ocean reaches the Great Lakes and splits the country in half, Ring of Fire, Yellowstone, Planet X, nuclear war, pandemics, EMPs. I mean, let's face it. There's a lot of things out there, Rick, that people hear about, they read about, but at the same time, they don't have the time to worry about it because they might even take the philosophy, like I often do, if I can't try to change something, why do it? Why not concentrate on the things that you can change for the better of your life, and especially regarding this show, the life of the little guy, the bottom 93% of income.
We need to take a more existential view of things and step back and witness ourselves. Now, once you've done that and you're watching yourself and the way you are responding to things, now you're going to get closer to core behavior. And core behavior is interesting because of the 5G situation. 5G is about our attention span and how it has changed over the years of now our attention span is even less than that of a goldfish. And going from you, and don't read articles anymore. You only read headlines. This is the level of information that's coming to us so quickly has overwhelmed our ability to process. And as a result, man is physically changing. Archetypally, we are becoming more like the singularity. And I'm going to say, not hive consciousness, but that is a kind of groupthink that we started with things like memes, and we're moving now into cybernetic anthropology, where we lay out cities to set up the kind of music that Chicago might do over New Orleans. And I know I'm now going to push everybody's envelope for mental ability, because I'm trying to say something extremely important here. And if you either get it or you listen to the show 5 times, and then you start to hear what I'm really saying. There's something else going on here. Have we been invaded? Yes. Why? Because our imagination would allow that conceptual thing. In fact, it's more. It was Joseph Campbell that said, quote, "When you see the kingdom of the Father on earth, the apocalypse has already occurred. It is perpetual in its potential." And with our constructs of technology and how quickly we are now beginning to assimilate data points, do you realize that the amount of facts that you would be given in the 1800s you get in minutes that would have taken 2.5 years in the 18th century. Now, what does that do to the group and individual? And that's the studies I'm finding very interesting. And the fact that we are now watching what's happening with the rings of Saturn. I could talk to you about the rings of Saturn. There's a science fiction show that nobody's heard of yet that is about to come out about the rings and why we don't build Elysium. Now, I can tell you it's all in metaphor.
Rick, hold on to that thought. We will be back with Dr. Rick Miller after the break, folks. Thanks for holding. Welcome back to the show, folks. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli. Our guest is Dr. Rick Miller. Now, Rick, you were talking about 5G. You mentioned this, and last week when we talked, you brought a bunch of stuff in here, which I thought was one of the best messages of last week, which was talking about, Wi-Fi in your own home, in your work, the radiation, the smart meters, the microwaves, even possible depopulation plans by the elite, mixing this with antipsychotic or psychotropic drugs. And, what you said about the 1800s, I've seen the math test, the English test, the history tests back in those days. You're right, we have been dumbed down, and this is one of the reasons why we talk about this on the new media so much, because of the fact that you have colleges, which I've mentioned several times, like the University of Illinois, and I mentioned her name, the math teacher there, but this is happening. This is a phenomenon all around the country where kids are paying, young adults are paying a fortune for education, but now they're saying that math is racist, it's white supremacist. So math should no longer be objective. It should be subjective. Folks, I'm not making this up. You can't make this up. I don't think that the Twilight Zone writers have ever made this up. So when you lower the bars of standards and expectations, for whatever reason, whether it be for a group, whether it be to divide and conquer the people, whether it be to steal their money for college, is this the reason why they're asking for free college? Let me just address that for 20 seconds, Rick. Free college. When you ask the people who have already paid for their college and the people who didn't go to college, for whatever reason, maybe they felt it wasn't necessary, maybe they took on a trade, maybe they couldn't afford it, maybe it was a capital resource, suggestion or idea or consequence, how can you ask those people to pay for other people's bill? And when you have free anything, you basically reduce that product or service to no value. So it's just like, you know, I got this from one of the comments about the free college BS. It's like it's analogous to federal government workers. When you can't get fired for underperforming, the value, the morale, the work ethic, the proven results, the qualifications, all decreases. There's no benefit to anybody when you do that. And that's what we're doing. So, Rick, go ahead and address any of the above.
Well, I don't know where to begin except that as a child in second grade, I was required to take Latin. Sum est sunt. In fifth grade, I was required. Look, I remember a time when Esperanto was going to be the cover language for Latin America, not Portuguese or Spanish. Now, I don't understand what's going on. I'm a nerd. I don't hang out in the political sense of things, and yet I see radio stations are being extremely political in immediate changes recently. GNC included. I'm not understanding why, unless something else is going on. And that's what I'm pretty good at, is the big picture. I can tell you that the borders that Trump wanted to put up, the reason we have a measles outbreak right now is because of foreign countries coming in with those diseases. And when you talk about immunization, I remember when my mother actually sought somebody that was sick with measles and mumps to get me exposed as a child so that I wasn't going to get sick later as an adult. I remember those days. Now, I went to China when I was 4 years old. Mom was Indochina Theater. She ran Kodak. And I was stuck in Buddhist missionary schools, and I had to walk to school every morning when I was 4 years old. And I remember being Caucasian. That's where I learned how to fight. That's also where I learned how to play chess. They played chess in the streets. Now, where is that culture today? I have realized that I don't know these things, and I don't quite understand except the big picture. And there's a war going on, right? And make no mistake, we're at war with something. And I don't have the answer. Now, we were talking about pole shifts and the loss of our atmosphere. There will be. There always has been during epochs. Man survives. It's part of God's plan. The purpose, original purpose of why a bunch of number one or elites were going down into Guatemala, they wanted to be the first ones out of the bunker, kind of like the Clovis culture. You know, I remember going down to Popo, and I remember watching the unearthing of all this stuff that was going down in the so-called Clovis culture. Their culture was greater. It was greater than New York City. I'm not kidding. I saw it. And they were unearthing things over there on that mountain and over there, and it was all one massive culture. We've been here before. It now would appear that Clovis had spaceflight. Go to the Cave of Dreams in France, and there's this bison on the wall, and oh, look at that caveman painting. Yet, on closer inspection, there are a bunch of moles or dots around the eye of that bison, and they correspond precisely with star maps of that period. And you go down further and toward Croatia, and there is a cave where those star maps are in reverse because they were witnessed from space. Now, I know I don't know how the pyramids were built and those kinds of things, yet I've seen Buddhists with technology using sound, the big long horns that you see in the Alps, that compress the air so tightly in resonant physics that it lifts large boulders that will float on air, and you can push them with a finger. I have seen that as a Navy intelligence scientist. Now, you tell me what's going on. We've been here before. If we lose our atmosphere, there will be survivors, because I have been in vaults that have closed systems like space. And that was Timothy Leary when he wrote his Smile, Space Migration, Intelligence Increase, Longevity Extension. And the only thing we couldn't do then was leave orbit. We can now. So man will survive. I've read Bear. Greg Bear has written sci-fi books about the end of days on Earth, where the aliens come and choose 144,000 to go up into space and witness the end of Mother. As a metaphor, I don't know. I'm a scientist, and I'm trying to grapple with all this data that's coming into me, and I can only say that the truth is not out there, like Molnar would say. The truth is inside yourself. It's different for each of us, and that's because God made us his favorite with choice. And we have a choice on how we choose to see what's going on right now. And my opinion is we have an opportunity, not a fear. That things are going to change, infrastructure is going to change, and control is a fantasy. It's not real. I don't care what the elite think. There's people like me that get it. And if I got it, you've got it. Because I am you, and you are me, and I am the walrus. That means the lead scouts give hope.
Well, Rick, I think what you're saying, and this is one of the interpretations I'm getting, and I'm hearing your whole message, is that the elite need to start listening to the people, because the people have come up with a lot of good ideas and solutions, and we've done that quite a bit on this particular show, as well as many of the new media / alternative media. And the people at the very top, they have this addiction to power, money, and control. And you mentioned about the illegal immigrants and measles, and I think that's really just like a cover to take vaccines. We'll talk about that in some degree. But there's a lot of more very disturbing diseases coming over the border. Ebola, tuberculosis, drug-resistant hepatitis, all the hepatitis, leprosy. I mean, these are diseases that don't build immune systems. These are diseases that kill. So, you know, it's very, very disconcerting with what's going on with the people coming over the border and the lack of vetting that's going on, and who gets the brunt of these consequences. It's the little guy who we stick up for on USAPrepares.com. It's the bottom 93% of income earners who get killed, whether it be losing their immune system, deaths. You know,
how did they put it in Hot Fuzz? For the greater good.
Well, it's a bunch of crap. Just like I mentioned on the air on Tuesday with Vince, you know, there's been 70 people dead of mass shootings in 2018, but over 2,000 deaths from illegal immigrants. Now, it's unbelievable how they can call for the taking of our weapons to protect ourselves, even in our own homes, and yet they're not really mentioning the source of the biggest problem, never mind the rapes and sexual assaults that occur from illegal immigrants. And not all illegal immigrants are bad, but I think just to give credibility and legitimacy to the people who are coming here, if we did it legally with a vetting system, I think everybody would benefit in the long run. Rick?
I don't have any way to respond to any of that because I don't know what's going on. I can tell you that there will be survivors. And will I be one? I have no idea. I can tell you that consciousness and here, and I'm writing about that right now in several of my new books, it's not real. This isn't real. That's why we have such things conceptually of reincarnation. That's why we now realize that time is a construct.
Rick, hold on to that thought, buddy. We'll be back after the break, folks. Thanks for being with us today. Rich Scheben from offgridmontana.com, sitting in for Vincent Finelli, and our guest is Dr. Rick Miller. Rick, we're going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about, we can basically combine the next three topics: immune system, edible medicinal plants, and gardening, because they're all really connected at the hip and related. And I'm just going to set up some talking points, and I'm going to let you take over from there. But when you really look at all the toxins, whether they're being sprayed or they're being created in a laboratory, the biotechnology, the nanotechnology, the artificial sweeteners, bleached white food, toxin-loaded gluten, synthetic flavorings, petroleum-based food colorings, MSG that has who knows how many, 100 different names so they can disguise it in our food. We have in our meats, we have red dye, we have non-meat grown in laboratories now, sold in restaurants, not kidding you. You've read about this a few times: steroids, hormones, antibiotics, GMO foods, pesticide-fed cattle, cloning livestock, modified proteins and enzymes, and so many of our food for the purpose of the shelf life increase in the stores and even to the field. We have all these modified proteins and enzymes really affect the bioavailability of the absorption of nutrients, the excretion, metabolism, and overall homeostasis in our body. So I think it's so important to talk about, even definitions of enzymes, which act as catalysts for biochemical reactions, which aids in digestion and nutrient support, and should not be cooked over 130 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of people aren't even aware that vitamins and minerals really come from the soil and not necessarily from the plant. And the behind-the-scenes protection by Congress, like Monsanto, where 96% of the shareholders voted to not disclose GMO ingredients to make the people sick. And I know you're not big on economy, but I've mentioned this a few times over the air, that now our GDP, and I know Vince likes to use that acronym for generally dumb public, I'm going to use it in the context of gross domestic product. Our GDP regarding making people sick from big pharma and hospitalizations and diseases is between 20 and 25%. This is why I say GDP doesn't make happiness. It's being out of debt, it's having some savings, it's having some skill sets, and hopefully living in nature, what the rest of these segments for the rest of the show might hopefully make you at least curious, if not convince you to go in that direction. So, Rick, regarding some of the things that I just said, vitamins and minerals, the meats, the proteins, the enzymes that's been modified, never mind the flu shots and vaccines and anti-anxiety drugs and antidepressant drugs and the blood thinners and the cholesterol-reducing meds. Oh, my gosh. I mean, how do people, Rick, deal with all these immune system killers bombarding our bodies at one time? Rick?
Your body is an extremely important laboratory. Isn't it interesting? Self-organizing. Isn't it interesting that everything that you eat becomes you? It's not enzymes. Polypeptides are what cannot be taken over 97 degrees Fahrenheit. And polypeptides, specifically neuropeptides, are the ones that take trace minerals across the blood-brain barrier, for example. Now, that means that nerve damage, for example, if you don't cook certain foods, can take trace minerals across the blood-brain barrier, and now the brain is capable, even at my age of 75 years old, I can regenerate nerve tissue. I can heal a severed nerve trunk. I did it in laboratory. I wrote technical papers on that with Robert O. Becker, a Nobel Prize winner. I have written these papers to demonstrate the possibility of... There is a book by Ward Dean, he's Surgeon General of the Marine Corps, that called Biological Aging Mechanism. And what he did is he went out, clinical...
Rick, I'm going to have you hold that thought till after a heartbreak at the top of the hour. Thanks for holding, everybody. We'll be back with Dr. Rick Miller. Welcome back to hour number 2. This is Rich Scheben from OffGridMontana.com, sitting in for Vincent Finelli. And our guest is Dr. Rick Miller. Rick, the segment before the break was quite short, and you were in the middle of discussing something. Do you want to finish that up, or do you want me to move on with another question?
Thank you. What I'm trying to suggest is that everything about aging is reversible. We already know that. Yet, all of us, the lifespan for someone like myself used to be, 75, went up to 92, and today I may be able to live to 130. Now, what does that mean? It means that we are beginning to where do I begin on this? Allotropic medicine, the primary medicine that is practiced in America, addresses symptoms, not root causes. That's what the body does. It goes right straight to the root of what the problem is, and that's what Chinese medicines originally were formed of with the Neijing. It had to do with systems in the body that looked and would replace other kinds of systems like the brain. The brain, if you had brain damage, the brain, for example, can remap itself, and a stroke victim can start speaking again. You have that ability. What it all comes down to is what has been called in allotropic medicine as placebo, your mind's eye. And that's why the mind's eye is different for each of us, and why homeostasis is different for each of us. Where one man is dying, another with the same situation is not. How does that work? It's because of belief systems, and to use them as tools in a toolbox rather than God-given. If you had been born in Afghanistan, you would not be a Christian. It wouldn't happen. Now, does that mean everybody born outside of America is doomed? No. What we're finding today is the use of psychedelic medicines that heal yourself on a spiritual level, and that proliferates down into the physical plane, like depression. Depression is a choice, and you can choose to be depressed, or you can choose to see it as an opportunity. It takes discipline to do that, and nobody is talking about training the mind. Every saint in history has advocated the importance of meditation, going internal and training yourself so that you don't let your mind wander. The wandering daydreaming is an extremely important tool, not that you should be doing it like taking sugar. It's the reason we have obesity is because of the invention and use of sugar. It creates candida. It causes body odor. You want to cover that up with smells rather than going to the root of the cause, which is too much sugar. You produce this mold inside your body, and then it comes out on the outside of your body as a secretion. And you can easily get rid of it with apple cider vinegar. There it is. Yet, we would have all kinds of anti-odorants and processed sugar processes where, how did they put it on Jay Leno about Dorito corn chips? Don't worry, we'll make more if we run out. The construct of diet is different for each of us because of our belief system. And I go back to Gurdjieff that says to eat your environment. You know, you're a habitat, just like where you live. And you find your niche in the scheme of things. If you live on the coast, you eat fish. If you live in the Midlands, you eat grains. It's you get your blood types. You know, they talk about blood types where your polypeptides or your neuropeptides are not as strong in type O blood. You need to eat more meat, that kind of thing. I don't know about these things. What I'm doing is discovering for myself. I am today healthier than I have ever been. I can remember. I have titanium in every single limb in my body because I was a SEAL. But at some point, I've taken over control. And it's called puer wounding and Ulysses scarring. And that's the archetypal way of looking at the storyboard I'm involved with, where I've realized I have mortality rather than I'm a god. And because I've come to that, I live with my wound. Now, it turns out that my wounds are blessings from God because they are what make me uniquely different than you. And so each of us is uniquely different in consciousness state because we have wounds. And these wounds, absolutely, like anger. When I have anger, that is a perfect energy to wash a kitchen floor. It's used in right action. When you can containerize and understand what your wound is, now you have a choice on how you use that as a tool for evolving. And man, right now, is in a crossroad of evolution. And it's not about this war with the 90%ers versus the 1%ers. They're in the same problem. Hillary Clinton got into adrenocortisone, and it's crazy. That's why she wasn't allowed into Washington. I mean, if you really want to get down into it, I can run it down specifically. There are cults out there that are doing creepy things. Why? Belief systems. But these beliefs are actually God-given tools in a toolbox. If it's a very hot day, you would not wear a sweater. Doesn't make any sense at all. Now, you don't have to throw that sweater away. You can retain your Christianity when you go to Iraq as a soldier. But it doesn't mean that being a Christian going to Iraq can get you killed. And as a metaphor. And that's what I'm trying to suggest, the bigger picture of you have control and nobody else can change that. That's why aliens, they say, are aliens good or bad? And the correct answer is yes. Anything you could imagine is true, and even more, because that's what the 5G thing is, the speeding up of time, the ability to process more information, the faster attention span. And once you get that bigger picture, now you have empowerment. And once you have that, there isn't anything anybody can do to take that away from you. What are they going to do? Shoot you? How's that going to change anything? Death is not what we think it is. And actually, it's all right there in front of you, and each one of you listening to me right now know exactly what I'm talking about.
You know, Rick, I personally, I'm from the show me state in my heart. So I like math, I like numbers, I like science, I like data. I don't like narratives. I don't like false flags, hoaxes, propaganda, and lies. So that's one of the reasons why I go back to, the math, the science, the numbers, and things of that nature. And I think that's what most of us really hang our hats on is objective facts, because narratives are not objective facts. They're manufactured perception to sway the public opinion. Now, I'm going to mention some of the things. I'm going to give you a few questions that you mentioned. You mentioned corn chips, like Doritos.
Yeah.
Basically, it's when you light it with a match, folks, see how flammable it is. I've used that in emergency situations to literally light a fire. So talk about the chemical. I mean, there's so many food-like products out there that have high sugar content. There's MSG, there's aspartame, all these artificial sweeteners, nicotine, high fructose corn syrup. Everything's designed to be addictive, including propylene glycol, which is an additive in foods that they use for antifreeze. I have an acronym, Rick. SARP, synthetic, artificial, refined, and processed. Try to keep away from that. But, when we talk about things, a lot of these immune stimulant destructors, if you will, we need to talk about all the pathogens and the bacteria when I was a pharmaceutical rep, we used the term beta-lactamase a lot. Basically, that's an enzyme produced by certain bacteria that inactivates penicillin and creates resistance to that antibiotic. Well, now it's not even penicillin. Now there's second generation, third generations, and cephalosporins that are not really working against some of these bacteria. Never mind the viruses that are out there as well. So when you look at things, what they're doing, Rick, you say we can live to 130 years old, but when the powers that be are using the state along with creating immunity to corporate America, aka Big Pharma, and they're using vaccines and injecting our little newborn babies whose immune systems aren't even developed yet, never mind the central nervous system. There's so many autoimmune disorders and allergies that we haven't seen before. And, a lot of these vaccines are from infected blood cells from animals. And, the CDC and doctors, they put their hand on the Bible and they say they're 100% safe. Well, how can they be safe? And I've mentioned this, pardon me, I'm going to change context a little bit, but it's going to hold some water. The CDC did a study on guns but never publicized it. In other words, they were bought and paid for because the results wasn't what they wanted. The guns were used offensively by victims 3.6 times more often than were used offensively by criminals. Now, if the CDC doesn't have the guts to tell the outcome of the study when the taxpayers pay for it because the narrative doesn't come out to what they wanted, how the hell can the people believe what the CDC says? So regarding our immune systems and vaccines, Rick, and antibiotics, which I mentioned, especially in the gut, after the break, I'd like you to go into that in a little more detail, please.
You bet.
Welcome back, folks. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli, and I am with Dr. Rick Miller. And we were talking about vaccines and antibiotics. I posed a few questions to Rick. And Rick, it's admitted that mercury, MSG, formaldehyde, aluminum, all potent neurotoxic chemicals or heavy metals are in the flu vaccine. That's just the flu vaccine. And, we're talking about immune stimulation and obviously immune suppressants, like you mentioned sugar, which is very obvious to the people. It's just that, speaking for myself, I have a sweet tooth, so it's very hard for me to stop eating sugar. I try to do it with moderation, but that's as far as I can get. So, Rick, go ahead and comment on what was said before the break, and go for it.
I'm not sure where to begin. I can say that the line between something being an addiction and a tool is a very thin line of gray. And consciousness is basically, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't have believed it. Now, you realize that belief systems now can become a tool in a toolbox to do things because of your wounds that nobody else can do. And each of us is uniquely different. That's what made us God's favorite, to be able to make choice. And that's where it all starts. Knowing yourself, to be distinguished differently than your mother, your father, your siblings, and people around you. Each of us is uniquely different. There's trolls out there. There are people listening that want to discredit whatever's being said. They have a purpose to let us know what I don't want to be like. Now, that's how that all works. And I guess what I'm trying to say is the truth is not, like Molnar, the truth is not out there. The truth is inside yourself. And most people don't even know how to listen to themselves in terms of what they really feel about something. And that's where you begin. Self-realization, and begin training the mind. Once you've done that, sugar now becomes a tool and is useful here, but not there. It's addictive. That's what I meant by metaphor. When, they design foods so you want to eat them. They make them look good. They make them taste good. and they make your body confused and wanting more. Once you understand that, now discipline takes over, and you make a distinction in using this as a tool rather than a, fructose sugars are quite different than processed sugars. They don't seem much different in the body, but they are, in fact, metabolized quite differently, and why you would like to eat fruit, but you don't want to eat a processed sugar. Salt is the same thing. Salt is already present in most all foods. All your vegetables have salt in it. Why would you want to add more salt? For the flavor? That's the part about confusing something that tastes good. That's Charlie the tuna. He doesn't have good taste. He tastes good, right? The difference. I have to say that we're confused by the bombardment of media. And today, with 5G, we're being bombarded a million times more with information today than what our ancestors received. And the filter part is where you begin. Where do you draw your line? And each of us is a little different. Have you seen the obesity in the state of Oregon? Our state is quite different than the Midwest. And I would say that 1 in 4 people are obese here in Oregon. It's unbelievable. And it's just food choices. That's all it's about. And how much you eat. Why? I don't have the answers to things. What I am doing is going to try to leave a footprint by doing what I believe in, and that is a witness. That's exactly how you do it. Walk your own step.
All right, Rick. After the break, I'm going to ask you some more questions about our immune system, and we will be back after the break, folks. Thanks for holding. Thanks for joining us, folks. We really appreciate it. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli, and I'm with Dr. Rick Miller. We're talking about the immune system. And, Rick, I want you to address a few things I'm going to throw at you right now. One is being talked about almost every day in health circles, and that's glyphosate, which is the main ingredient in Roundup. We all know it hurts our immunity. It affects our metabolism, like nutrient absorption and excretion and just overall bioavailability, and destroys our good gut bacteria, which is vital to fighting infections. Never mind the prescription medications in all of, especially municipal water, which is, we can't even use that good water to filter out our bad toxins anymore. And then you got antibacterial hand sanitizers and soaps. How do you recommend for the little guy that doesn't have the capital resources to buy organic? And we're going to talk about GMOs also if we get into it. Obviously, we're not going to have time to get into edible and medicinal plants. Maybe we can do that another time, Rick, when we're together. But go ahead and address those concerns that I just mentioned, please.
Okay. I'm not sure how to proceed on this. I'm being lost in the whole thing. Monsanto originally was a weapons company for Old Man DuPont. I was there working with Old Man DuPont, and Monsanto was creating weapons of war to be used in Vietnam. It was called Agent Orange, and the defoliants that they would do to go in and make the jungle more habitable for American soldiers to kill Vietnamese. I was there. When that changed, Monsanto decided to go into controlling seed. And what happened was that they moved, rather than to seed, but modifying into cultivars and changing things. And Agent Orange and Paraquat were then modified to what we call a translocator, which is called Roundup. Now, Roundup in itself was relatively neutral. You put it on the plant, and it broke down within 10 days into the salts, into normal salts in the earth, and it stopped the plant from being able to photosynthesize. Went into the root, and it was a translocator. However, what Monsanto decided to do was put it into the gene of the plant so that it was constantly being produced and acted as a weed inhibitor. That's essentially how Roundup became a weapon. And it would be put inside the gene, and then it was ever present in the plant as keeping grasses and other kinds of unwanted crops from being able to develop. Well, that is quite different because it didn't break down then. It was constantly being regenerated. And now Bayer has purchased Monsanto for $300 billion. What do you think that's going to go? Bayer is a German Nazi-based corporation. It's the biggest company in the world. And they are now moving to phase 2 of defoliating the planet and having control of what can and cannot grow. That means that Bayer is going to try to control life itself. What do you think about that?
Well, they're trying to control the seed industry right now, and that's why we're big proponents on USA Preparedness.
Their goal is much bigger than that. Oh, man. They're much... You're not seeing the big picture here. I'm concerned. If you want to have a target as the most evilest company on the world, you might start right there. Now, we're seeing side effects with what GMOs do, but GMOs themselves, is not a bad or good thing. It's a thing of which man is trying to do with himself, cloning. But what they're doing is they're going to try to take over the whole very concept of what life is, self-organizing. And I have to say, I'm extremely concerned as a scientist. And really, I have no idea where this is going to go with all the doom and gloom that's going on and the control of media so that your belief systems are being focused in one area over others that you might otherwise take a look at for empowerment, and dumbing down our children. I mean, just basic things like cursive. Cursive is how you move from one side of the brain to the other. That's why they taught it. Script is different. And then mathematics. And to be able to do script, you have to move from right to left brain. That is a skill set that has to be developed. And they're taking that out of our school system. I don't have answers. What I'm going to do is suggest that everybody move toward a more simple way of living. And when you have a cell phone or an automobile like Vincent and I talked about, which is now remotely controlled, has its own computer, and the fact that it has power windows so you don't have to roll the window up, you can manually, you can push a button and electrically it does that, or it'll automatically do that, set the tone of how comfortable you are and make that determination so you don't have to think about it. Smartphones, smart cars, this is nuts. For me, a more simple way of living has always been a preference of mine because then I am master of my universe. I don't need to go outside of my universe to have somebody else fix something I can't. And when you think like that, now, and you can use technology. There's nothing wrong with technology. It's how you use it. And that's what spirituality is. Not what you do, how you do it. And so a more simple way of living has always been my goal, to simplify. If, the only reason I do radio and talk like this on the radio is because I must have an income and need to promote my books. And right now, I am being hammered by giants trying to stop that process. And because of it, it doesn't matter. I would much rather be on top of a mountain like a Quaker and have a very simple life of growing my own food. When you grow your own food, like a child going to a play box, that's empowerment. And it's not about growing food. It's about the feeling that you don't need to go to Mexico to get your avocado.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we grow our own food here on the hobby farm, and we try to concentrate on immune stimulants. And
you won't have trouble with GMOs when you're doing that. And
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Because you don't go to the store to buy your food. You grow your own. Simplify whenever you can. You can grow lettuce. That's what you eat. Do it.
Mm-hmm. And Rick, I'll tell you something. There's plenty of evidence out there that GMOs does cause cancer, organ failure, and changes your DNA. And that technology, they can put antibiotics and bacteria, and even like the Roundup that we talked about in seeds and food. So it's very scary. And this is why I mentioned that article that you basically cued me to do unintentionally in the beginning of the show, where the article states, coming to America, the complete deplatforming of all non-establishment voices. Basically, if they take away information, especially objective facts that helps the little people, how is the little people going to think for themselves if they can't read up and research up? That means they're going to be experimented on at every level, and that's quite scary. And Rick, talking about immune systems, our time is getting pretty short here. I wanted you to address fluoride and chemotherapy, because it's very obvious that fluoride,
the polysaccharide,
main ingredient, it creates cancer. It's a main ingredient in rat poison. Even China labels it as a pesticide. It makes women infertile, everybody else docile.
And yet, rat poisoning is used in medicine to thin the blood. And that's where we're wrong. There's lots of different ways. I use chlorinase, which is an enzyme, rather than warfarin. Now, when you go to surgery, they're worried about clots, and the first thing they put you on is rat poison. Newsflash. Warfarin. And what I did is use chlorinase. There are alternatives out there. And mainstream medicine is broken. And you can't rely on medicine anymore. What you can rely on is when you know something's wrong, you're usually dead on. And you know more about your body than your doctor does. And I remember a time when my doctor used to come to dinner every Thursday night. My dad's home. And what has happened? What has happened to the relationship of a doctor wanting to help you rather than have you be a number with Medicare and he's a cheeseburger? I have my own opinions about things, and I live a more basic life here, and I'm feeling I feel encroached. That's a right word. And basically, I'm going to run my ship, maritime law. I'm captain and commander, and I'll make my own mistakes and learn from them, grow. I will not, if I can, I will try to grow something before I go out. And even just doing a small portion of your food production changes everything with attitude. That's where help lies.
Well, Rick, we're going to have one more segment, a short segment before the end of the show, and maybe I'll ask you one question on edible and medicinal plants, and we'll call it a show. But thanks for being here, folks. We'll be right back after the break with Dr. Rick Miller. Welcome back, folks. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli, and we are on our last short segment, and we're going to talk about edible and medicinal plants. Rick, if we ever duo up again, we're going to have to do a whole show on this because I really miss talking about it. But I'm going to mention what I have on my property here, and Rick, you can comment and let me know what you think regarding your favorite berries. I'm just going to stick with some berries right now. On my property, I pick wild strawberries, raspberries, Oregon grape, currant, gooseberries, service berries, choke cherries, hawthorn berries, Penick. We also have buffalo berries and snowberries, which are not considered poisonous, but sometimes it's in the edible category. It just doesn't taste real good. It's kind of bitter. And, of course, we go up on higher ground and pick our share of huckleberries and elderberries. The best wine that we've ever made here at home in the cabin is Oregon grape and elderberry. So, Rick, I know we have a short time. I have so many questions on edible and medicinal plants and gardening.
Let's start with this one. If you're in the woods and you don't know whether something is edible or not, this is the way I trained Navy SEAL Team 1. On the underscore of your arm, the soft part of the arm, you put a scratch with a fingernail. And then you put the mushroom or the object against that to see if there's going to be a histamine response where it causes irritation. That'll happen within 10 minutes. You'll know whether that plant is edible or not as a simple first test in the woods. It's a very simple test. The underscore of your arm and the histamines. That is what will tell you whether something is toxic or not. If you're not sure, don't do it. That's it. Simple. Every woods has different habitat. You have been climatized to that habitat, which means your Oregon grape that you mentioned is golden seal. It's a different plant than golden seal, but every single wood has its own chemical analogs. And the American Indian will say that wherever there's a toxin like poison oak, the antidote grows right next to it, bracken fern. That's it. It's a simple way of looking at the woods because it's good and bad in the woods. That's because you are human and have polarized everything. Is that about
okay? And that's good advice, Rick. I really like the toxicity with the skin rubbing, and that's
a useful tool when you don't know.
No, I agree. And another common food here in northwest Montana, we have lots of wild onions when I'm out hunting or fishing. You know, I often don't even take a meal. If I'm out for a day or two, I can just feed off of wild plants very easily. And regarding wild onion, it grows so abundantly in northwest Montana. It can be eaten right out of the ground pretty much every summer month. But you got to be really careful because even though onion tastes sweet, you got to make sure it smells like an onion because if it doesn't, it could very easily be death camas. Now you can tell by the flower because of the onion flower versus the death camas flower, but the death camas leaf, which obviously by its name is very toxic, you have to make sure it smells like an onion, and if it doesn't taste like an onion, you got to spit it out. Now I also harvest red clover, violets, and violets, fireweed, oxeye daisies, dandelions, raspberry blight. There's a whole list. I've got about 50 edible and medicinal plants.
Here's the deal. Originally, the way you did that came from older techniques like culpepper. The color of the plant and the shape of the plant told you what part of the plant you use for your body. Red clover. Red clover is red. What would that be for the blood? Why? It's high in iron.
Mm-hmm. Very, very well said. Well, Rick, as usual, we never get to all the topics or questions because time just goes by too fast. Really appreciate you being on the show, and I'm glad we got you through a secondary communication because your Skype or the GCN Skype was not working. So thank you for being here, Rick. You have a great rest of the day, and we really appreciate you listening, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in to USAPrepares.com. Have a good day.